Today on Design, Build, and Fix, we're going to show you how we're going to cut that 2,000-pound black walnut log cut into saw boards with this LT70 wood miser saw. Alright, if you like the content, make sure you click the subscribe button. Alright, we'll show you how we get this thing done. Alright, so the first thing you have to do is check the log for any foreign objects with a metal detector. It's important that you do that because every time you hit a foreign object, it's going to cost you $35, at least for this contract, because the blade has to be changed and it wrecks it, and it has to be resharpened. Now this log came from the urban forest, which means it's the backyard. Now this came from my brother's cottage, and I know right there is my sister-in-law did put a hammock in there and put a screw in there, so he's digging that out right now. But there's probably more foreign objects in there, and you really want to make sure you get those things out. Now this sawmill does have full hydraulics to it, and I'm not a Sawyer, but if I were to buy a sawmill, I would not buy one that doesn't have hydraulics. But even though this has full hydraulics, you still have to be able to get the log onto the part that actually lifts the log onto the mill. And what the device that he's using there is called a cant. Now, I probably didn't do him any favors, because if you notice on the one side there is some where branches came off. I probably could have sawed those things a little bit flatter, because he has to come back with a cant and roll it back onto the part so we can cut it. So I probably didn't do him any favors, but if you don't have a heavy piece of equipment like a little mini excavator or a skid steer or something to load these logs on, you're going to have to use a cant. So I've instructed my Sawyer that we wanted to saw this log for grade, which means we want to get the best quality lumber out of it as possible, because this is black walnut, and walnut's very expensive. So in order to do that, what we have to do is we have to make sure that the pith of the log, which is the dead center of the log, is equal on both ends off from the mill. Because if you don't get it perfectly parallel with the mill, what you're going to have is on one end of the board, you're going to have no pith, and on the other end, you'll have pith. And pith is not something that you want to have in a piece of furniture, because it doesn't move the same as the other material or wood that's in that board. So now that we have the pith of the log that's parallel with the sawmill, what we have to do is start to square this log up. And our goal is to come out on the right-hand side of this log just below the sapwood, because black walnut tends to have quite a bit of sapwood in it. Usually about 1 to 2 inches around the outside, which is pretty much waste material when it comes to black walnut. And so we started pretty low on the left-hand side, and it's going to pop out hopefully just below the sapwood on the right-hand side. Now that little device you see in front of the sawmill actually cuts through the bark, cuts out some of the dirt, and what it does is it makes the saw blade stay sharper longer, because you don't want to cut through dirt with the saw. So now that the first side has been flattened, now we're going to rotate the log 90 degrees, which is going to allow us to make our second cut on here. And we're going to do the same process. We want to make sure that the pith is in the center, so he's going to raise or lower one side in order to get that to be perfect right in the center. Now you're definitely going to make sure you get this right. So as with anything in woodworking, you're always going to measure twice and cut once. But what we want to do is, once you know for a fact that it's definitely in the center, you're going to bring that saw back, and you're going to actually cut just below the sapwood on the left-hand side. Hopefully it comes out just below the sapwood on the right-hand side, which is going to produce the best quality lumber for us. Now I will have to admit, I am not a Sawyer, nor have I been trained to be a Sawyer, but I've sawed quite a few logs in the past with other people. And this information that I'm sharing with you is just giving you information as the things that I've learned over the years as what it's been doing. And just to give you an idea, if you do hire a Sawyer to cut your log, what to expect, and hopefully get you on the right track to know what to expect once he gets there. Now we lowered that saw blade down to hit just below the sapwood on the left-hand side, and it should pop out just below the sapwood on the right-hand side. Now the side that's going to give us the best quality, I believe, is going to be the opposite side of the first cut, because that's the opposite side of the branch, because that side of the tree actually had nothing on it. Now if you take a look at the board that just came off, most of that sapwood, except for that little brown ring right there, that's some heartwood. But that log, or that board, is pretty much useless. All right, so now that we have two sides that have been squared, we're now going to rotate the log another 90 degrees in order to give us our third side that we want to get the sapwood off. Now, that third side is probably going to give us the best and the clearest lumber, so we want to be very careful as how much material we take off. And as you can see in this log, we have on the left-hand side, it's a little high. On the right-hand side, it's a little high, and there's a little dip in the middle. So we're going to come below the sapwood on the left. Hopefully it pops out below the sapwood on the right. We'll see what we find out here in the center. Now, just like we did in the past, he's going to measure to make sure the pith is in the center. It's very important that you keep it in the center so we don't have any pith wood in any of our good logs. All right, so now that our first pass is done, you can see the board split in half, but if you look on the left-hand side where he's just throwing that, we're just below the sapwood and just exposing heartwood. And because it was so narrow in the middle, it actually split. So we're going to go through and actually make another cut. And this one's going to have a little less sapwood and a little bit more hardwood, but that's going to give us not a really good board at this point in time, but it's going to prep us for the second one. All right, so now that that's been cut, it's going to take it back. We're actually going to see exactly how good of a board we got. And as you can see in the center there, it's a little thin. On the left-hand side, there's a little bit of heartwood there, but that board is also junk. But the next board that comes off of that side is going to be the best wood on this tree, at least in my mind. So we're going to find out here shortly. So now we're on to squaring our fourth side, and going back to the beginning of the video, we always want to make sure we check for foreign objects, and we didn't find any, but apparently right about here we run through a nail and we're going to have an issue. So we're going to find out what that looks like here shortly. If you can hear the audio on the saw itself, you hear it zip through it, and I heard it when we were recording it, and we definitely did hit a nail, and we're going to have to pull that out. So in order to save time and money on this milling process, I should be helping him pull those scrap pieces of wood off, but I can't because I'm still in my wheelchair from my motocross accident. If you're wondering why I'm not helping out, I'll put a link to that video at the end of this video to give you a little bit more information about that. So at this point in time, now we have to dig that nail out, and he has a specialized tool for that, to dig that out so we can get still use that side of the board. Alright, so now that the nail's been removed, we're going to come down and take our first 4/4 board off of this side of the log. Now the problem is, once you've hit the nail, it's going to take a couple of those teeth out, or dull a couple of those teeth out on the bandsaw, and it's going to cause the board to actually have some washboarding on it, which means going to have high and low ridges on it. Normally that's not that big of a deal because you're going to have to plane these boards anyways to use it, but it just depends on how difficult or how deep those things are if you actually want to go ahead and use it. So he's going to bring the board over to me right now, and you're actually going to see where it was smooth on the top, on the left-hand side. If we can see it. Yeah, right there is where the nail was. On the left-hand side, it was smooth on the opposite side, but that's the washboarding that we have. We've decided that we're going to swap that blade out because we didn't want to have to deal with that. All right, so the surface you see there at the top, that's going to give us our worst material out of this log because you have those two knots that are in there. So we're going to rotate it around to the opposite side. And the side that's up right now is going to give us our best boards. But if you look at it, when we rotated it around, you're going to find that on the left and the right side, there's a lot of heartwood, but in the center, there's still a lot of sapwood. So in order to solve this, we don't want to have a whole lot of sapwood in it. So we're going to take a little sliver cut, probably about a 1/2 inch thick, off of here, and that's going to take the majority of that sapwood off and allow us to produce the best material possible out of this side. So we're going to run it through, take that 1/2 inch piece off, and then bring it right back and do the next cut, which is hopefully going to give us our best material. Now, if you noticed, he's put the device back on that actually cuts the bark and dirt off to help protect the new blade. And I understand why he did that, because it is a new blade and there's a cost to resharpening those things. So he put that device back out to actually make that cut to help the saw blade to stay as sharp as possible. So now we're coming through. They've done the 1/2 inch or 3/4 inch board that has a lot of sapwood in it. Now we're coming through and producing our first, hopefully high quality 4/4 rough cut black walnut board out of there, and we're going to find out what that looks like here in a second. Now, I'm not sure what percentage of sapwood can actually be in a board for it to be considered FAS first and seconds, which is usually the best material. As you can see there, there's some heartwood there on both ends and sapwood in the center. But the next board that we're going to pull off is going to have hopefully the best wood on it. Now the top portion probably going to have a little bit more sapwood on the sides. As you can see there, a little bit, there it is. And we flip it over, you're going to have less sapwood on it. All right, so now what we're going to do is we're going to take another board off of here, because we're sawing it for grade, because that first board came off, was clear. And the rule of thumb, at least from what I understand, is that when you're sawing for grade, you continue to keep sawing that same side until the grade changes. Now, if we have clear and we actually show up with 1 knot, then at that point we may, rotate it because the grade has changed. Or you can go until you get 2 knots. I'm not sure what the criteria is, but we're going to have to look to see what happens once this comes off. And if the grade does change, we're probably going to rotate it 90 degrees and make another cut on there to get most of that sapwood off, as you can see on the face that you can see right in the video there. All right, so now that this board's coming off, we're going to take a look at it, and looks like we have a knot there on the right hand side. And so that means the grade has changed, and we're actually going to rotate this 90 degrees and make another cut because the grade has changed. And then we'll keep cutting on this side until the grade changes, and so on and so forth. All right, so now that we're gonna take a cut out of here and see what kind of quality that we actually get. Now that we've rotated 90 degrees, my guess is we're going to get a clear board also. And if we do get a clear board, we're going to take another cut on there, because what's going to happen is the grade hasn't changed. And so, oh, there's my brother. He showed up to help. And as you can see, that side is really clear. There's no knots. It does have a lot of sapwood on the right-hand side, but a lot of that's going to get cut off once we put them all up there. And so now what we're going to do is make another cut on here, and hopefully we get another clear board. If not, then we'll probably rotate it around and get another board off the other side. And as you can see, looks like we have another clear board. And so the grade hasn't changed, and we're going to make another cut. All right, so hopefully we'll get another board out of here that's clear. We're going to find out here in a second. And as you can see, looks like we have 2 knots there on the left-hand side, so that changed the grade. So we're actually going to rotate it. We're not going to take that side that you can see right now because that's going to give us our least quality. Hopefully this side here, which is 90 degrees to that worst side, should give us a relatively clear board. But if you take a look at that face that you're looking at there, we do have a lot of sapwood that's showing up, but it should show up on the sides. And so we're going to make one cut out of here. This should be a 4/4 board also, and he's going to bring it through, and we'll see exactly what this board is going to look like once it's cut. Now, if you're looking at it, you notice that he has not used that vise that actually cuts before the saw blade, because all the bark is gone and all the dirt is gone. So it's going to, the integrity of the blade is going to stay sharp for quite a while now, because there's not going to be cutting through any bark or dirt. All right, so now this board's going to come off. If you're going to look at the top side of that board, on the bottom side, we have a lot of sapwood there, but the heartwood of it looks really pretty clear. And so I'm not sure if we're going to rotate it or not. Alright, so at this point in time, we've decided that we wanted to actually rotate the log 90 degrees because the last board that came off that side had a lot of sapwood on it, and we decided to actually rotate it 90 degrees. Now we have to decide whether we're going to do the top or the face, and right now we're discussing that the top has 1 knot in it, and the face of the log now has 2 knots in it. And so we've decided to cut the side that actually has 1 knot in it, because that's going to produce the best quality compared to actually having 2 knots in it. So we're going to cut this one right here and see what the grade is once it's done. Alright, so we measured the width of that board. It's almost 11 inches wide, and we found that it had a little bit more knotting in than we wanted. So we're actually going to rotate this around to grab another board off another side. Now at this point in time, we haven't taken any off to the side that's going to produce the least amount of the worst quality, so to speak. So we're not going to take one off that side. We're going to go back to the side that gave us a pretty good quality, which is the one that's at the top now. And we're going to cut that until the grade that changes from 1 or 2 knots down to more. Alright, so now we pull this off and see what the grade looks like. On this side, it's relatively clear. There is a small little knot in the top right corner of that, and it is a relatively wide board, so we've opted to go ahead and make another cut on this side to see if the grade changes. Now realistically, based on the price of the walnut, you're definitely going to make the best material out of it, but even if you took another board where you probably shouldn't have, it's still going to produce some really high quality material. Now if you notice there, we got 2 knots in there. And so at this point in time, we've decided that we're going to make another cut on there because we didn't want to rotate it around to get that side that actually had the 2 tree branches on it, because we knew that was going to produce some knotty material. So we grabbed another board off of here. Now at some point in time here, we're going to get pretty close to the pith of that log. And right now, we're taking that board off the pile because it doesn't have any waning on it, or it doesn't have any bark on it that has to be retrimmed. So that went into our finished pile. So now we rotated the log again, and we're going to get down to the point now in this log where the quality of the boards are going to be relatively pretty much the same all the way through. And so we're going to make this cut, and we're going to do another cut right after it, because the quality is pretty much going to be pretty consistent all the way through. One thing we do have to be concerned with is we don't want to get into the pith of the log, and so we're going to take these boards off. He shot it out how big it was, but if you take a look at it there, you're finding that right there in the center that we're starting to get into the pith. So at that point we want to rotate this around again in order to get away from that pith, because the pith is not something that you want to actually have in a material when you're building furniture out of it. So at this point in time, we're getting pretty close to the part where it's getting to the point where we're just going to cut boards out of it and see what we get. Alright, so now we've rotated it around a couple times to actually see what size board we want. Now if you take a look at the face right there, you can see the pith is on the right hand side there in the middle. That's something that we don't actually want in our board. And that board, the width of the board right now that you're seeing that face is probably 7 inches or so. And we opted to take the top portion because that's going to give us a wider board, and we still haven't cut into the pith yet. And so now we make that cut. And at this point we're probably just going to keep cutting away because we're getting towards the center. At some point you should probably just stop cutting and it's all firewood after that, but based on the value of the log we decided just to keep cutting, and we'll get it kiln dried because the cost of kiln drying at this point in time, I already got a price, it's 80 cents a board foot, and even if there's a portion of that board that I can use for something, we're actually going to be using it. And so this is going to be our last couple boards, and the sawing process is pretty much done. The only thing left to do is take all those boards that are on the hydraulic lift there, and you want to get the bark and the sapwoods off the side. So coming here shortly, we're actually going to be putting those back up and taking sliver slices off at each side to square up the boards and take that waning and bark off. Alright, so now that we've finished the major cutting of it, we're going to take all those boards that have bark and waning on it, which is the sapwood on it, and we're putting it on its edge, and we're going to cut those off to get most of that sapwood and bark off, because really the one thing that's going to cause the grade of your board to go down is the sapwood. And so right now we're cutting off some of the sapwood and some of the heartwood, but that's going to be one of those things you're just going to have to deal with. But now that we have one side done, we're going to have to flip those over and do the opposite sides, and we're picking through the pile now to make sure that we have the boards that need to be another trimming, and some of them that don't need any more trimming are actually done. We don't want to cut off anything that's valuable, and so all those things right there, you can see there's a lot of sapwood on the top, and we're going to cut that off. And to save time, it's going to be a generalized cut, because you are allowed to have a little bit of sapwood on it. And if you even have a board that has some sapwood on it, you can cut that off after the fact. Alright, now because we're getting down into some of the boards that are the most valuable, we put a scrap piece on there so that the holder there doesn't put a mark into that board. That's why that board was left there. And looks like we're finished everything up, and looks like we got some high quality lumber. All right, so here we are 2 hours later, 170 board foot of walnut, and as you can see, this 9-inch board, crystal clear except for the sapwood there. We have boards that are 9, 10, 11, 12. We have a couple that are 16 inches long or 16 inches wide, and they all have that beautiful graining that you see right there. So that was a job well done. We actually got all this 170 board foot of black walnut, and the cost to mill it was $200. So I think that's a great deal. Alright, thanks for watching another design, build, and fix video. This black walnut is going to go to use very, very shortly. So if you like the content, click the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, leave a comment if you like, so you don't miss any of these projects that we're going to come up with the making of what we make out of this black walnut. Alright, we'll see you on the next one.